Hello, my name is Christopher, and I serve as the senior pastor at Lakeview Missionary Church in Moses Lake, Washington. In this video, I want to talk to you about Paul's war, about how Paul ruthlessly tried to kill the church, Paul's war, and what that means for him in his life and that drastic change that happened. So I'm going to be in the book of Galatians, reading Galatians chapter 1, verses 13 through 14, if you'd like to read there with me. Verses 13 and 14 say, "For you have heard of my former manner of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions." Here we read about how Paul ruthlessly was trying to kill the church. And what is clear is that he had a reputation and people knew about it. He has a story, a life before Christianity, and he shared it with the Galatians when he was with them. In verse 13, he says that he persecuted the church and he tried to destroy it. And notice how he says, "in my former manner of life." In my former manner of life, and how I used to. In other words, this is the life he left behind and that he has moved on from. This was his life in Judaism, where he tried to follow the 39 books of the Old Testament. But it's no longer a description of how he lives. And we can read about Paul persecuting and trying to destroy the church in Acts chapter 8, verses 1 and 3. Says Paul was in hearty agreement with putting him to death. That is the death of Stephen. And on that day a great persecution began against the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria except the apostles. But Saul began ravaging the church, entering house after house and dragging off men and women. He would put them in prison. And then if you turn over to Acts 9, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Now Saul," which we know as Paul, "still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for letters from him to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, both men and women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem." Persecuting the church was the regular, everyday of the week activity for Paul. It's something he pursued and he tried to do. In his own words, he broke records for persecuting the church. He did it better than anybody else. He was on a mission to eliminate the Christian church. In other words, he was literally trying to kill the church, the Christian church. And here he goes on from persecuting the church and trying to destroy it in verse 13 to verse 14, that Paul advanced in Judaism beyond his contemporaries with zealousness for the ancestral traditions. This work he was doing seems to have been making a name for himself. Here, the Greek word for advancing has in the Greek language to cut forward as in a forest, or to blaze away, or to move ahead. His name, if we could say it this way, was on the top of the list of the top 10 Jewish rabbis of his time. If there was a workshop being held about how to persecute the Christian church, Paul was who they wanted to teach it. If there was a Christian persecution magazine that was circulated, Paul was the one they would take a picture of and put him on the front cover with his arms crossed, smiling, as the epitome of the one who knew how to persecute Christians. But when it talks here about his ancestral traditions, that I was, as he says here, verses 14, "I was extremely more zealous for my ancestral traditions." As we read about that, he's referring to the 39 books of the Old Testament, as well as the extra laws and regulations that the Jews had created. These were called the Pharisaic teachings and the popular teachings of the time, which later became literature, such as the Mishnah, Mishnarim, and Targums, those Jewish literatures that still exist even today. An example is from Matthew 15 and Mark 7, where Jesus and his disciples enter this house, and they're going to go in this house, and they enter the house without washing their hands. And some Pharisees say, "Hey, stop! Hey, why didn't you all wash your hands according to the tradition of the elders?" That's a quote in Matthew 15 and Mark 7. The tradition of the elders. And that was extra documents. If you read the Old Testament, there's nothing in the Old Testament that says you have to wash your hands when you go inside to eat. Now, it is a good practice, of course, but those are all of the extra laws and regulations that the Jewish and Pharisees had created, and which Paul was so fervently trying to apply. And that's what he was advancing in when he talks about these ancestral traditions. So that's Paul's gospel. Things that he talks about. That's Paul's gospel war that he was on. He was ruthless, but if you read the book of Galatians, you learn that there's a 180-degree change. But that's a little background about Paul's gospel war. Thanks for watching this video. If you found this video helpful, you're welcome to subscribe to this channel. And also down there in the first comment, I have a link where you can subscribe to my monthly email newsletter, where I will send you a update once a month. I promised, only send you one email a month. And when you subscribe, I give you a free Bible study guide that you can use to study the Bible on your own. Thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you again soon in another video.